Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Cassandra.
Thank you for participating
You're welcome.
in my client interview project. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions where you talk about your eating disorder.
Okay.
So we'll start with when and how did your disorder begin?
It began around the time that I was graduating junior high, but I wasn't officially diagnosed until I was 14, and I had gone away to boarding school. And I think that my mom had fears about my having an eating disorder before I went away, but then when I went away to school, it really escalated, and at a certain point, the school told me I couldn't be there anymore because of it. And then I went into a hospital setting.
What form was it? What type of eating disorder was it?
It was anorexia nervosa.
Okay.
It wasn't bulimia.
So when it was in junior high, so you were starting to be, you were just about a teenager.
Yeah, I was like just hitting puberty basically.
Okay. Did you ever notice that it was problematic? Did you ever think that you needed help?
I knew that what I knew was that I had become really obsessive and controlling about what I ate. I did know that, but I didn't necessarily see it as a problem. I saw it as like a way to control my emotions. It was like, which I didn't think was a problem. I thought it was like necessary for me to like keep it together.
What emotions were you trying to control?
I think like, for example, I was really terrified about going away to school, and I didn't want my family to see that. I wanted to seem like really strong. I think there was a lot of weird stuff around becoming a woman and puberty that really scared me. That I didn't know how to talk about, and I felt ashamed about. A lot of it was around that, actually. And yeah, and sexuality, and I think a lot of it I didn't even know intellectually at the time, and I couldn't really articulate, but they were all just unfamiliar, scary emotions that I felt like I could constrain by controlling what I ate.
Sorry. I just want to make sure that this is going to stay on a quick little pause. Let's take a little laugh. Technical difficulty. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, going through puberty is a really tumultuous experience, and it's even harder to articulate to even understand what's going on when you're so young. Yeah. Did you ever feel like your disorder prevented you from engaging in certain activities with friends or family?
Yes. Like, from the definitely with my family, it was very disruptive with my family because once I was actually diagnosed and it was clear that all my meals had to be monitored because otherwise I just wouldn't eat. That was disruptive to my family because it meant that every mealtime was about Hannah and like making sure that I ate.
So you had all this attention.
That I didn't want.
Or that you didn't have before.
That's interesting. I don't know about that part. That might be true, but I know that at that point I didn't feel like I wanted that kind of attention. I didn't want people making sure I ate my dinner. But it was disruptive in that sense. Like I remember going on family vacations and feeling like I ruined the family vacation because I like threw out an egg or something.
Something that would be minuscule before, but it's kind of amplified under that context.
Yeah. Well, and I should probably also mention that my mom suffered from anorexia around the same time when she was younger. And she was, at that time, she was sent to just a general mental hospital. And she never fully recovered, so she has osteoporosis now. And has suffered a lot of bone injuries because of it. And so she was just like, I am not letting you not recover from this. She was very, she got very emotional around it, which was hard for me because like, yeah, understandably. But, and then in terms of like social stuff, it definitely was disruptive because when I went away to boarding school, I didn't feel like participating in a lot of social, normal like social engagements where kids were getting to know each other just because I was so anxious around food. Or people asking me. A lot of like kids at school would ask me if I'm like what was wrong with me, why I wouldn't eat. Just flat out.
Do you think they had the language or the understanding of what was actually happening, or it was just a curiosity?
I don't know, because even at the time I knew it was like a little bit inappropriate. I don't think all of them did. No.
I have another question regarding your mother. So did she ever talk about her struggles with her disorder when you were growing up before you got it? Or okay.
She talked about it, but like I think she chose to tell me about it like right when she could feel it happening with me. And it was like her way of saying indirectly, hey, this is something that runs in our family. And she didn't at that time feel like she could say, I'm afraid this might be happening with you. But she instead was like, this is something I suffered with. I think that was her way of saying, like, if you're struggling with it, you can talk to me about it. But unfortunately, that didn't really take. I do remember, I remember her coming to pick me up at boarding school, and like sobbing and her telling me that I was gonna get better, and I didn't believe her. Yeah. There were definitely points where I thought I would never get better.
Were there certain environments or contexts that supported your disorder or enabled you to not participate in certain activities? Did you ever feel like it interfered with participation in certain activities that you wanted to do, or?
Yeah, like I wanted to, everything when I was away at school, the school I went to was like athletic, and I wanted to do a lot of athletic things, and I couldn't. They told me like it was physically unsafe for me to do that. Even after my time at the hospital, I couldn't really go and hang out with friends for extended periods of time because I had to eat a certain number of calories every day, and so if my meals weren't monitored, like my parents just would freak out, There was in the early stages, I just couldn't afford to lose any more weight. If I did, I would go back into the hospital. It was like a really critical time. And I think when your body is in a malnourished state, it does everything to conserve. So it's like very easy for your weight to drop back down drastically. So yeah, the most basic thing was that I couldn't go to school. I was basically homeschooled for like a year because I had to gain weight and I had to learn how to eat again.
And so I feel like you touched upon this in bits and pieces, but I guess to give a more general sense, like how did your immediate and or extended family react to your disorder and your recovery?
My dad was pretty avoidant about it. He didn't quite know how to deal with it. He tried to be there physically. I remember if my mom wasn't there, she'd give him instructions about how he needed to be there and monitor my food intake, but he otherwise was pretty emotionally detached. I have two younger brothers, and honestly, I'm still sort of dealing with the emotional fallout with them. I just started talking to one of my younger brothers, the older of my younger brothers, recently about how it affected him, because I think it really did. Mainly in the sense that he was 10 years old and didn't quite understand this. He couldn't wrap his head. Most adults can't wrap their head around it either, but he couldn't wrap his head around why I wouldn't eat, what was wrong with me, and it also took a lot of my mom's attention away from him.
So do you think there's some kind of resentment or animosity?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's your middle brother, the middle son. Okay. And you also touched upon this as well. I'm sorry, some of these questions seem redundant. But obviously you were treated, but how were you treated? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, initially I was admitted to the Lucille Pack, I think that was the name, the Lucille Packard Hospital at Stanford University, because at the time that was the only facility in California that treated eating disorder patients, which seems so crazy to me. So I was in a ward for a month specifically for eating disorder patients, which was kind of wild. Like,
were they at different ages or?
They were all around my age. And there were some boys in there too, which was kind of interesting. I had like a roommate, but I was on bed rest for about 3.5 weeks, meaning I was not allowed to get out of bed. And to go to the bathroom or take a shower, I had to have someone like holding my hand or watching me. I, for 3 weeks, wasn't eating solid food.
Mm-hmm.
I was just drinking these like milkshakes in a can called Boost or Ensure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like 20 a day, like, because I needed the calories, but they said I wasn't stable enough to handle solid food.
And was it any of this done involuntarily? Like, did you resist or?
Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't want to be there at all. And, I think I tried to like escape a couple times, maybe in the first week. Like just get up and leave.
Really? Like walk out of the hospital?
Yeah, which is insane. I mean, I was totally insane.
How were you caught? Who caught you?
I think it wasn't hard. I think a nurse just like was like, nope, back you go. But I think the worst part was every hour on the hour I had to have my vitals checked. So that includes during the night. So I never got a full night of sleep. Like, it was just very surreal having someone come in and like check your heartbeat every hour. Like, have to be connected to I was connected to a monitor, and it was hard too because I had some friends that called me in the hospital and they didn't understand what had happened, and I feel like I don't know, those were friendships that were lost because I just didn't know how to deal with it.
Did you understand why you were there at the time?
In the beginning, I was like, I was just so far gone. I was like, you all are crazy. I'm not sick. I don't have a disease. But that was, I was like 60 pounds at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And to put that in perspective, I'm over twice that now. And I was the same height. So my brain just wasn't working. Yeah, and then I think there was a point of acceptance, maybe a couple of weeks in, where I was like, yeah, I'm definitely sick, but I still don't want to get better. Yeah.
Was it also because you were in a facility as well with other kids that were going through something similar that kind of put it into perspective?
Yeah. I like bonded with my roommate a lot, and talking about food with her and our control issues and everything, and just our obsessive tendencies, I think did put into perspective for me, like, oh, I'm not the only one, like, I'm not special.
Whereas prior, you thought it was unique to you.
Yeah, I thought it was like, I don't know what I thought, but I was so committed to it as a way to control things.
I wonder this is kind of off topic, but it's not off topic of conversation, but you say that your mom noticed, I guess, the early signs of it, and that's when she became more vocal as a way to protect you from going down that path. But what were the triggers? Like, what was the signs that maybe might have been like irrelevant or minuscule to me, but perhaps to her was clear, like a clear sign of
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. Like, the first place I go is just like before, I was kind of the kid that would try anything. Like, if she wanted to go to a restaurant, I would just go and eat anything. Or if she made food for dinner. I started making like my own dinner, and I started making my own everything. And it got more and more Spartan, like, and I think she noticed that.
So, how long is your recovery process, and when were you given permission to leave the hospital?
Well, the hospital I was only at for a month, and that was just literally to get me out of the woods. Like, that was just to get me stable enough. But they had a very strict plan. Like, after I left the hospital, I was still in an outpatient program with them, where I would have to go in every week and get weighed, which I hated. But then I worked with a therapist that wasn't affiliated with them, which I liked a lot better. But the whole process of recovery, I would say, took at least a year for me to really, but it was a grueling year. It was like almost all I focused on.
I have 2 follow-up questions with that statement. So, why did you hate getting weighed per week?
Whew, oh my God. So I also I should mention that a lot of the times when I would get weighed, I knew that I had lost weight because I still had the disease, So I didn't want to there was a part of me that really didn't want to get better. And so I would hide objects in my clothes, like staplers or weights in my pockets, or drink a ton of water, like a ridiculous amount of water before getting weighed.
As a way to give the illusion that you were gaining weight.
Right.
But really so you can maintain.
Right. And I got caught multiple times.
You got caught.
Yeah. Why did I hate it?
Was it embarrassing when you got caught?
Oh, yeah.
Did they shame you?
They didn't have to. It was just embarrassing. It was like, I got caught. It's like getting caught cheating on a test. except it felt even more dumb because they were pulling these like random objects out of my pockets. And I hated it because I didn't, at that point, I didn't want to see the number on the scale. I didn't want to see, I hated that there were weeks where I really felt like I was doing well and I wouldn't hide anything in my pockets and I could still lose weight. And then I would kind of get a talking to about like, well, why have you lost weight? And I'd be like, I don't fucking know. Like, I did everything right. Leave me alone. And then my mom would get mad at me. I mean, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Like the intrusiveness of it all.
Yeah.
I feel like in some ways your body didn't belong to you.
Yeah.
It was someone else's responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
The second follow-up question that I had to your answer was the therapist. So you mentioned that you preferred working with one therapist who wasn't affiliated with the outpatient program, more so than the one that was working in the program. It just begs me to wonder, like, what was your rapport or experience with the people in the program? How did that differ from the treatment that you received elsewhere?
So the therapist that I worked with in the outpatient Stanford program, she just, I guess I hated that because basically what would happen is that I would come in every week and get weighed, and then my whole family would come into the room and under like this harsh interrogation light sort of, and she would talk about like, well, okay, Hannah lost a pound this week. How do you all feel about that? Or so, like you said, it was like my body wasn't mine. It was like, it's just the property, like my family just free to say whatever they feel about it before I get a chance to. And I did feel shamed a few times. And then we would all go out to dinner at this horrible restaurant after, and then my mom would just be like watching every bite I took. So yeah, the family therapy aspect did not feel effective to me. I think because it was so, the premise was always what I weighed that week, which always felt a little like a violation. And also because I think even at the time I knew like, this isn't just about my eating disorder. This is family therapy. This should be about like all of us. And it felt like it was just about me being a problem.
It's interesting because like the consequences are so counterintuitive to what you were trying to do in the first place, which was establish some type of control. And then for that to have spiraled out of control, the consequences are like completely devoid of control or any agency of yourself or your own body.
Oh, but sorry, I didn't address the therapist. So then I started seeing a therapist named Maureen Katz in Berkeley, and she was just really, I'd never done one-on-one therapy before. I'd never had an adult who wasn't my parents just be like, you can talk to me and I'm not going to tell anyone. So that was really revelatory to me. And I remember my first meeting with her and I just felt so completely out of control. And was completely out of control, and she just sat there and was like totally unfazed by how crazy I was acting, and I was pretty impressed.
What do you remember what you did? What does being out of control mean?
I was just like, I think this was right before I went to the hospital, but I was freaking out because I was like, my parents want to send me to this hospital. I'm not going to let them. I'll run away before that happens. Like, blah, blah, blah. I was just saying all this crazy stuff. And I was like sweating and crying, and I was so skinny and like just a wreck. Like, and she was just like, okay. And like, I hadn't had someone talk to me like just like a normal person in such a long time. So, but then I continued to see her for like the next 4 years, 4 or 5 years, on and off.
Always related to your disorder, or just
No, because after a year, I sort of felt like I had made a full recovery, which I did not think would happen. I kind of thought I would live with that for the rest of my life. I really did. I just didn't see a way out.
how did you? So, what did full recovery mean? What does that mean?
Just like before, I could not imagine a world where I wasn't obsessing about food 24/7. Or how many calories were in something, or what I could and couldn't eat, or ways to hide food, or socially acceptable ways to hide food, or lie about food.
So it wasn't necessarily that like you attained a certain weight, but it was more that anxiety.
That was part of it, though. I mean, I did gain like 20 pounds at a certain point. And by that point, it's like your brain is healthy enough to literally physically healthy enough to think logically. Whereas before I just wasn't. Like my brain was starved and I wasn't thinking clearly.
What does that mean? Like when you, I understand, being malnourished can affect your level of cognition and certainly your energy. But could you describe like what those differences were compared to when you recovered?
Like what it felt like when I was malnourished.
Yeah.
I just felt this crazy manic energy when I was like severely underweight. I think I was running on it felt like I was running on like adrenaline all the time, and I just wasn't. I do have diaries from that time, which are kind of wild to read because they're just these like several pages like every day of just scrawling out kind of nonsensical thoughts and very paranoid thoughts. I was very, very paranoid.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like you're always running on like flight mode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like you're always like in a high adrenaline state.
Yeah, and I remember so specifically one afternoon when I was I don't know where we were going, but I just remember I was in the back of my dad's car, and I was trying to plot out what the rest of my life would look like and how I was going to, sounds so ridiculous, but how I was going to like nourish my eating disorder, but in a socially acceptable way. Like how I was going to keep this up.
Like how you can maintain it. It almost sounds like it was an addiction.
It literally is.
Yeah. So, you also answered this in segments, but how were you treated, or were you treated differently by your family and friends post recovery? And I know you spoke about how your family treated you during recovery, but
post recovery.
also during and post.
Yeah. I mean, my mom in particular was hyper vigilant around me, and I think that took a while for us to like recalibrate our relationship, where she realized that she didn't have to be there for every meal I was eating. She didn't have to worry about me like hiding food or but I'm having trouble remembering exactly like how we transitioned into that. I think it was just more like as I got better, she got less worried. A lot of my friendships either kind of dropped off or were put on hold because a lot of my friends just didn't know how to deal with it. But also, I shut out a lot of people. I did have friends that were reaching out and trying to be supportive and calling me, and I was too ashamed or embarrassed to see them or to like admit what had happened. And
even though, did they suspect? Did they know?
I think a lot of them suspected, yeah. But I think they just hoped it was sort of like a phase. They didn't really know how to talk about it.
So were those friendships that were restored?
Some of them were, and some of them were.
Did that kind of help you? Did you have a different impression of human behavior after that? Did you become a bit more jaded, or?
I think if anything, because I went back to high school with like other kids after I recovered, and if anything, I think I was so excited. I was so excited to like be with other kids my age, and I think I did appreciate at the time that I'd just done something really hard that I thought was impossible. I think I did have that appreciation at the time.
So, I mean, I think we're the same age, so what you're talking about probably happened to, what, like maybe 20 years ago, less?
Yeah, a little less. Like, God, I'm so bad at math.
I'm about 32. So,
yeah.
Yeah, a little less, so maybe like 18, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
So then, how's your relationship with your body image now?
Now? Recently it's been weird, I think because of quarantine, because I haven't been able to move as much. But it's more or less with a few, random pockets here and there. Since then, it's remained pretty steady, like pretty, I've gone through phases of thinking like, oh, I need to lose weight or stuff like that, but it's absolutely nothing like, I thought that I was gonna live my whole life being totally obsessed by food and not. I literally didn't know how other people led normal lives and like didn't obsess about that. It was like an addiction.
Well, I guess a better way to put that question is, or to phrase that question is, how did you see yourself back then, like your body image?
How did I see myself?
Was it a distorted perception of yourself, or?
I don't even know. So the funny thing about it is it must have been distorted because I did not see how skinny I was. I've thrown away all the pictures of me from that time because it's too disturbing to look at. But I don't think I knew what I looked like. That's for sure. But I also don't know that it was about being skinny. It just felt more like a control thing. I wish I knew how to explain that better.
It seems like we touch upon the word addiction often.
Yeah.
During this interview, but it seems like it was more about that, like having that handle on a really chaotic period of anyone's life developmentally.
Yeah.
So it was a transitional period. You were going from childhood into teenagehood, into puberty.
I've never been good at transitions.
But even, I mean, it reminds me of really unusual habits that I also possessed when I was during that like unique period of time in my life that I would never do or participate in now as an adult, like with my level of rationale and my level of understanding myself and my level of integrity. But I think when we're still children and we're going through that period, we don't have integrity. We don't have morality, really. Like, we just have these kind of like ideas of it, but we've never. So I think it's easy for us to like experiment in dangerous behavior. I mean, I certainly did.
Yeah.
That I would never do now.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does make me think how addiction, I think I would always associate it as like a way to be out of control, but when you're actually doing it, it does give you a nice sense of control. Yeah, or like, I don't know.
An illusion of control.
It's like contradictory because it's an illusion of control over something that's so harmful.
It's like you're on the razor's edge and you're trying to control that. I mean, it's funny, like after almost 20 years of thinking about it, I still don't really understand it. But
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking about being so open and vulnerable with me now.
Sure.
It's really interesting. I've never spoken to anyone who experienced something like that. So, does your former eating disorder interfere with what you eat or eating patterns or your habits now?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I wouldn't say I have the healthiest eating patterns all the time.
Or I guess more so,
like the thoughts associated with it.
or maybe your sense of control. Like, does your former eating disorder interfere with wanting to be, I don't even know how to word it.
Like needing to control things.
Yeah, has that like altered your perception of wanting to have more control over your life, or do you realize when it can be dangerous or you can be going down?
I definitely, that's interesting. I definitely, but maybe the biggest difference is that I definitely still have those tendencies and they just can express themselves in different ways, but the difference is that I usually can see them. It doesn't always mean that I know what to do about them, but I can at least see them. Whereas before, I just refused to.
When you say them, like you're more aware of.
Like I have other ways of wanting to like control, and it's all illusory. It's like none of it's real, but other ways of feeling like I'm in control. Kind of compulsively. But I can at least recognize them now most of the time. I'm trying to think of like, I mean, they sound pretty mundane, but like, you know, whether it's usually obsessing over something. It usually takes the form of like obsession.
And so instead of actually acting on it, you can look at it from a distance. You can look at that kind of, that desire to enact some kind of control over a certain structure in your life.
Yeah.
So has your form disorder shifted your priorities and desires in maintaining your health? Or do you value health more now, or do you look at maintaining your health differently?
You know,
has it shifted like your priorities in terms of
I think it shifted for a while. For a number of years, I was like really physically active and really appreciated all the things my body could do. And I honestly think I've fallen off a little bit in that regard. Like I think in the past couple of years, I've sort of been like, with my body. And I'm not sure why that is. I would like to, I'm actually trying to like prioritize it more and appreciate it more.
what were some of the things you did in the past?
Like when I recovered and I went back to school, I became the captain of my cross country team. And I think about that a lot now because I'm like, wow, you did things like regularly. You pushed yourself physically and mentally in a way that you didn't think you could and did. And I've been suffering a lot from like depression these days. I think a lot of us have. But there are days where I'm just like, I can't imagine writing this thing, or I can't imagine sending this email or making this phone call. Just like we're getting out of bed. And it's important to remember those times where you did the thing that you thought you couldn't do. Because something in you knew you could.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so these questions weren't, and I'm happy that I didn't probe you so much beforehand, but I couldn't predict how this interview would have gone, like how it's gone so far. I mean, despite how interesting it is, I probably would have rewritten a lot of questions to tailor the answers that you gave me. But that's just the nature of the spontaneity of it. And also I'm happy because I think it makes for a better interview, I think. I hope.
Are you sure this is recording?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it makes for a better interview than if I knew exactly how it would have gone. Or if I knew more about your history.
Right.
So, we're almost done, by the way.
Okay.
So, what areas of your recovery did you think were successful aside from just like maintaining a healthy body weight, but also
what areas do I think were successful?
Yeah, in terms of your mental health or physical health, anything, or your relationships with your family or friends.
I mean, I think the therapy I did was really beneficial. I think I feel like I would have come to therapy at some point regardless, but the fact that this eating disorder forced me into therapy at a relatively young age was sort of, it made me think a lot more critically about my actions and why I do certain things or don't do certain things. And I really appreciate that.
So it kind of gave you self-awareness at an earlier age. That's incredible.
Sometimes I think maybe that's not good because sometimes I can like obsess about the things I do, so I can be overly aware, but overall I think it's good. And I think, this is so dorky, a huge part of my recovery was doing theater.
Like, why was theater so, was that accidental or?
Well, it was something that I had loved when I was younger, and then it's interesting because when I started like starving myself, I let go of a lot of things that I loved that I thought were like silly or like needless or whatever. And one of them was theater. And so I didn't even sign up for like any theater stuff when I went to boarding school. And I remember my parents being really confused by that because they were like, well, you always like that. But I wasn't just denying myself food. I was denying myself like lots of things.
This makes me wonder, is that what you thought adulthood was?
Yeah, I think I thought I needed to be like more serious or something. That I wasn't a serious person.
In this transitional state.
Yeah, but then, so I remember after I had gotten to a pretty relatively healthy weight, I was still pretty thin, but my dad noticed I was just so lonely because I wasn't interacting with anyone. I was just at home, and he was like, you used to really love theater, and there was this amazing like youth theater company in San Francisco, and I think you should audition for it because that used to make you really happy. And I did, and I got in, and it was like probably the best thing I ever did. And it made me so happy, and I did a ton of shows with them, and I also like opened up to people in the theater company about my eating disorder, and they were very like non-judgmental. But that was like a huge part of my recovery, I think, because it allowed me to lose myself in something. I wasn't thinking about me. I was like, and I also like needed it gave me like a bigger purpose that I totally forgot about, that I totally neglected. And I was like, okay, I care about this more than I care about nurturing this disease of mine that I've been so protective of.
So wonderful. I mean, it's such a wonderful conclusion.
Yeah.
And I love hearing that a creative outlet was so therapeutic for you.
Yeah, that was probably, I can't believe I forgot to say that, but that was probably one of the biggest parts of my recovery.
And the second part of this question is what aspects of your performance disorder still cause problems or risks to your physical and mental health? Or if you even believe that there could be no answer.
I mean, I've been seeing it more recently, I think because we've been so much more isolated. And that's definitely like it's not good for me to be isolated. And then the thing that I tend to do is if I do like start feeling depressed or need help, I retreat and I won't ask for help. I'll just like fold in on myself. But also what happens is I start to obsess over like stupid shit. And so I have definitely obsessed more over like my body and stuff like that during quarantine. I've seen it crop up in a way that I haven't experienced it in quite a while. But it hasn't manifested in me like starving myself or anything, but the thoughts are there.
Is it because we're living in an environment where there isn't a lot of control? That's unprecedented.
Yeah, like I'm so powerless over everything right now. I mean, we all are. And so that definitely like fuels it.
Okay, so home stretch. Last question. This is very wordy, so but can you provide a few examples of how your life has changed since your eating disorder, especially in regards to your values, interests, engagement in daily activities, and the meanings associated with the activities? I guess, like, how has what you experienced and what you've gone through changed your perspective, or maybe reestablish new perspectives regarding your interests, your values, what you find meaningful?
So I think that it definitely has made me have compassion for people struggling, whether it's with an eating disorder or addiction or any kind of compulsive behavior, because I know how real that feels when you're in it, and that it's not because you want to be difficult or need attention. It just feels real. I think that conquering the eating disorder did give me a new sense of self and a new sense of confidence that I didn't have before. Like, it feels like I slayed a dragon, kind of. And no one can ever take that away from me. I don't talk about it with a lot of people, but like just knowing it myself is enough. I think being more comfortable in my body and with my sexuality is a huge thing too. Because that's definitely something I was running from when I was starving myself. I just didn't want to be seen as like a mature woman at all. I kind of wanted to just like disappear. And then just the obvious one, which is like actually like I would have panic attacks before going to restaurants before. I mean, not that we can really go to restaurants now, but you know.
Well, we
like,
certainly eat together. Yeah. I would have never suspected that you struggled with this before.
Oh my God, because I used to go to the craziest lengths to like avoid eating food, like diabolical lengths. And the fact that I don't, and I just thought that was going to be my life. And the fact that I don't do that anymore, it still feels like, because I remember it very vividly, it still feels amazing. So
that's such a hopeful, that's such a beautiful answer to conclude this interview. Thank you so much for being so honest.
Sure.
Vulnerable and brave. And, yeah. Okay.